Well, hello, this is Vincent Green, and we're going to continue our study in the book of Genesis. We're in Genesis chapter 14, and we're looking at these first 16 verses, actually. Chapter 14 is divided into two sections, verse 1 to verse 16, and then verse 17 till the end of the chapter, but both sections relate together. One happens after the other, and they have a relationship with each other. And chapter 14 takes place sometime after the events of chapter 13, as I mentioned in our last session. But in chapter 14, you have the first recorded battle. Now, most likely there was wars and battles that took place prior to even the flood, maybe even up to this period of time. But this is the first recorded one because what happens in this battle has an effect on Lot and his family and also Abram. And God is using this battle, using this war to bring about a situation that raises Abram in the eyes of the people. And as we go through chapter 14, we're going to see this. So let me read to you the 16 verses. I want to do that each time. We ended with verse 4 in our last session. So I'll do a brief review, kind of pick up with verse 5, see how far we can get today going through the section here. About this time, war broke out in the region. King Amraphel of Babylonia, King Arioch of Elasar, King Chedorlaomer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goyim fought against King Bera of Sodom, King Birsha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shemaber of Zeboim, and King of Bela, also called Zoar. The second group of kings joined forces in Siddim Valley, that is, the Valley of the Dead Sea. For 12 years they had been subject to King Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled against him. 1 year later, Chedorlaomer and his allies arrived and defeated the Rephaites at Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzites at Ham, the Emites at Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites at Mount Seir as far as El Paran at the edge of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, it's now called Kadesh, and conquered all the territory of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites living in Hazazon Tamar. Then the rebel kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim and Bela, also called Zoar, they prepared for battle in the valley of the Dead Sea. They fought against King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goyim, King Amraphel of Babylonia, King Arioch of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. And as it happened, the valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits. And as the army of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into the tar pits, while the rest escaped into the mountains. The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and headed for home, taking with them all the spoils of war and the food supplies. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and carried off everything he owned. But one of Lot's men escaped and reported everything to Abram the Hebrew, who was living near the oak grove belonging to Mamre the Amorite. Mamre and his relatives, Eshcol and Aner, were Abram's allies. So when Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued Chedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them at Dan. There he divided his men and attacked during the night. Chedorlaomer's army fled, but Abram chased them as far as Hobah north of Damascus. Abram received all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captives. So a lot of names here, a lot of places, a lot of locations, but you have to understand that, and it's good if you can get a map. If you look in the YouTube description of last session or this session, and as we're in chapter 14, especially in the first 16 verses, I'll post a map or two that you can look at. It kind of give you a visual of where all of these places are located, so that way you get an idea. So I'm going to kind of try to explain it all to you, but definitely look at a map so you can see all of these areas. But as I mentioned in our last session, there is this battle between 4 kings and their regions, which are located north of the land of Palestine, or the land of the promised land, we would call it, the land that Abram lived in, and north of the Jordan Valley where Lot was living. And so the Jordan Valley and Abram were east and west of each other, basically. But north of them was this area, and to the east of them, past the Dead Sea, past that area, going towards Babylon. So you have all of these 4 kings, and they're all united. And from what we can gather, Kedorlaomer of Elam is kind of the ringleader of the bunch. And because his name shows up as being later in verse 5, and kind of gives us the background on what was happening here, and especially also in verse 4. So you have these 4 kings, but then you have the 5 kings. The 5 kings, so the 4 kings are the oppressor. They're the attacker. The 5 kings are the defendants here. They're the ones trying to defend their land. And when you read about them, it's Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and then the land of Zoar, called at that point Bela. And so remember, some of these names of cities, they changed names. By the time Moses is writing this under the inspiration of the Spirit, he's using current names of locations, even though he's writing about an event that took place many years prior. But sometimes the original name is mentioned, like Bela. And so, but currently in the time of Moses, that place is known as Zoar. And Zoar, that name is used for that same region back in chapter 13, verse 10. So you have the 4 kings who are north and to the east. So they're kind of above geographically this area of the Jordan Valley. And all of these kings, Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other 3 are kind of isolated in one region, south and south and west of the invading army. And so this battle is going to take place. The battle's listed later in the chapter, the actual battle that happens right there at the Dead Sea. But what caused all of this is that, and it states this in verse 4, 12 years the group of 5 kings were in subjugation to King Kedorlaomer in terms of like taxes, in terms of like kind of like a slavery. He didn't take people from that land to his own place unless he would choose to do so. But King Kedorlaomer wanted the control. He wanted power. He wanted to control not only his own kingdom and have an alliance with these other kings. He wanted to have subjugation, or he wanted to subject other groups of people, these 5 kings in their regions, to himself, so that he could tax them, so that he could go there through that region without any problems. He wanted to probably deal with Egypt in terms of trade routes. The guy was probably a businessman. He's a king. He's a political ruler, everything you could imagine. So you got these 4 kings. Their societies are evil, right? They're full of wicked people. So is the 5 kings. Their lands are filled with wicked people. So you got one group of wicked people invading another group of wicked people. And so Abram gets brought into the mix of all this. Lot gets brought into the mix of all this, because once they enter into that promised land, this is something that the events that caused all of this to happen that caused this battle to happen, the events that led to that took place years before Abram and Lot ever came into the promised land. And I talked about how Abram inherits a history. He couldn't control that history, totally out of his control. Now, God knows all the history. Abram didn't know all of that. But this battle takes place. Abram didn't cause it. Even Lot didn't cause it. But it affects both of them. And many would say, well, they're both in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, they're in the right place at the right time because all of this happens within God's sovereignty. So we got to take a look at what happens. So you get to verse 4. This is where we ended last time. So for 12 years they were subject to King Chedorlaomer. But in the 13th year they said, no more. We're not going to pay more taxes, tribute, whatever. We're going to fight back. They rebelled against him. And you say, well, how did they rebel? Most likely they declared their opposition to King Chedorlaomer in a certain way. Maybe they sent messengers. Maybe they just stopped paying the taxes, stopped paying the tribute. Whatever it was, King Chedorlaomer knew that the 12 years that was it. These people were not going to follow his influence leading anymore. They were done with him for whatever reason. And so King Chedorlaomer decides to retaliate. He's not going to let this go. And so in verse 5 it says 1 year later. That means he took a year to plan out how he was going to invade this area. Most likely he had discussions with these other kings, these other 3 kings that were allies with him. They sat down, they had meetings, they discussed this. But at 1 year later, Chedorlaomer and his allies, they decided that they were going to go and attack the people who were rebelling against them. They felt it was their right to do so, even though they were the ones initially who imposed their will upon the people, imposed their dictatorial rule upon the people around the Jordan Valley. And so what you have here is you have Chedorlaomer and his allies. They decide to go after and defeat all of these lands or all of these peoples around the Jordan Valley, the fertile area of the Jordan Valley. But they didn't just go and have just one big battle. They knew not to do that. They didn't want the 5 kings to be fully united, or all those areas to be fully united against Chedorlaomer. So what they did was they didn't announce that they were coming. They decided they were going to come, and what they did was they arrived and defeated, and they took each individual land area. They isolated everybody from each other, and they attacked them one after the other. They started with the Rephaites at Ashtaroth Karnaim. They arrived there and defeated them. We don't have any details of how that battle took place, how long it took place, how devastating was it, how many deaths and all that. We don't know that. But they came and wiped them out, defeated them. And if you wonder why are they choosing the people in this order, just look at the map and you'll see that they're following a pattern. They're following a certain course geographically, and it just happens that the Rephaites are the first on the list. After that, they went to the Zuzites at Ham, and they did the same thing. They had a battle with them. We don't know any of the details of the battle, but they defeated them. And then they went to the Emites at Shaveh Kiriathaim. So they're systematically defeating these different groups that had been subject to them prior for over 12 years. And now, since these groups had said, no more, we're stopping this, they were united. All these groups were united in opposing King Chedorlaomer. King Chedorlaomer and his allies was taking them out one by one. And so you can see, again, looking on a map, the way he's going. And so he comes from the east, he's headed west, but he's also joining with his army or allies in the north. And so as they attack these different areas, they're going down by the Dead Sea on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, and they're going south. And they're just taking out each individual group, each individual city-state. So they started with the Rephaites at Asheroth Karnaim. Then they went to the Zuzites in Ham. Then the Emites in Shaveh Kiriathaim. Then the Horites at Mount Seir, as far as El Paran at the edge of the wilderness. So by the time they get to the edge of the wilderness, that's the Negev. It's kind of the area that it's talking about. They're getting close to that. And so they're down south. Now they're below the Dead Sea. They've worked their way, starting from the east side of the Dead Sea, working their way down, and then angling over to going towards, like you would go to Egypt, that direction. And they take out that last group. Then they turn back, verse 7 says. Now they're going to be heading towards Sodom and Gomorrah. The big cities, the major cities. They're going to head up to that area, so they're systematically, their plan is to systematically wipe out all of these people, get them back into subjugation mode, squelch the rebellion. That's their plan. And so they turned back and they came to a place called En Mishpat, verse 7 says. It's now called Kadesh. That's the current name at the time when Moses is writing this. And they conquered all the territory in that area of the Amalekites and also the Amorites living in Hazazon Tamar. And so those areas, now they're working their way back up, heading their way to Sodom and Gomorrah. And so everyone knows they're coming, because they've been going through systematically, wiping out everybody, defeating everybody. Nobody can match them at all. Everybody is being defeated. King Chedorlaomer and his allies are they're rejoicing. They're like, yes, we are supreme. His pride, his ego, you can only imagine, it's just increasing as ever. So the rebel kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, Bela, they've seen all of this happen. Sodom and Gomorrah would be the major cities. Then you have these other 5 kings. They've been told King Chedorlaomer's wiping out, destroying all of these areas, and they're coming now for us. And so what we're going to do is not let them pick us off one by one. We're going to unite together. So verse 8 says that all of these 5 kings, which are located close to each other, they fought, or they prepared for battle in the valley of the Dead Sea. That's verse 8. So they're ready for battle. We're going to meet the enemy as they come to meet us, as they come to battle us. We're going to meet the enemy. And so verse 9, they fought against King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goyim, King Amraphel of Babylonia, and King Arioch of Elasar. It was 4 kings and their armies against the 5 kings and their armies. And this is the final battle. Everything is has been leading towards this. Is King Chedorlaomer going to win? Are the 5 kings going to defeat King Chedorlaomer? And how is this going to go? The names of the different kings, of the 5 kings or the 4 kings, are mentioned again, just to show you that none of them has died. All of these kings are still coming. And so they've made their way. And then by the time we get to verse 10, they're at the valley of the Dead Sea. So they're in the lower part of the Dead Sea area. They choose that region, and that's where they've been coming up. So all the 5 kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other 3 city-states, they say, we'll battle them there. That's where we will meet them. And for this battle, we do have a little bit more detail. It's interesting how verse 10 opens up, as it happened. as it happened, as things progressed, as things kept going. It says here, the valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits. See, Chedorlaomer's he's like a descendant, or not, don't say descendant, he's like a Nimrod. He wants power, he wants control. And so he feels jilted and feels offended that these other regions would not bow to him, not pay the tribute, that they would rebel. And so he decides, I'm going to come and I'm going to take care of everybody. I'm going to defeat who I have to defeat, because it's all about me being in charge. It's all about me having my will done. And so they come for the battle, and it says, as it happened, the valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits. So as the army of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, that means that King Chedorlaomer and his allies, they were winning the battle. They were more powerful. They were leading the charge. They were not going to be defeated. It just says, as it happens. Nothing, though, happens by chance, does it? It's just you have God's sovereignty throughout all of this. But notice, there's these tar pits in the area, and that became a detriment to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, because as some of them fled, or as they fled, some of them fell into those tar pits. From what we can tell, when you fell into the tar pits, you didn't come out. Some died, even though they didn't die by a sword or die in the battle, hand-to-hand combat, or whatever took place. They died by falling into the tar pits. The rest of them that were fleeing, that were escaping the armies of Chedorlaomer and his allies, the rest, it says at the end of verse 10, escaped into the mountains. So they're headed to the hills. They're thinking the mountains, it's going to help us. It's going to take care of us. It's going to protect us. But then you get to verse 11. The victorious invaders, that would be King Chedorlaomer, that would be his allies. They are winning the day. They are winning the battle. The victorious invaders, then when they realize everybody's fleeing, and they've accomplished what they need to accomplish, then they go into the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they plundered it. Plundering is getting the spoils of war. It's claiming for yourself someone else's property because you have been victorious over them. And so the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their regions and their allies, they suffer a humiliating defeat. A humiliating defeat at the hands of King Chedorlaomer. And you say, what does this battle have to do with God's will? What does this battle have to do? People died. All these people die in this thing on both sides of it. Yes, war is never good, but what war shows you is the sinfulness of humanity. Whenever there's a war, it shows you the sinfulness of humanity. And Jesus even tells us in Matthew 24 that wars are not going to cease. There's going to be wars, and there's going to be the rumors of wars. It's going to keep going on. It's not going to stop until God returns. Until Christ returns, there will always be wars, and there are going to be wars that are coming that will take place during the tribulation period that make current wars seem like nothing. So whenever you see a battle in Scripture, it's horrible. The victorious invaders here, they plunder Sodom, they plunder Gomorrah, and they head for home. And they're taking with them all the spoils of war, and they're taking the food supplies. They're taking everything they can get their hands on that would benefit them. But here's where it comes to affect Abram. Verse 12, they also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and they carried off everything he owned. It now becomes personal. It now becomes personal for Abram, and it will be personal for him. At this point in time, in verse 12, Abram does not know that all of this has taken place. He doesn't know that yet. He will be told, as we will find out in verse 13, but he at this point does not know that it has taken place. But what you see is that Lot was not the ultimate target of King Chedorlaomer. They didn't come to this battle because they needed to look for Lot and his family. No, they were just Lot's in a place. He's living there. He chose to live there. And one of the consequences of living there is that you're in the area of the people, living in the region of the people that have decided to rebel against being taxed and occupied and being lorded over for 12 years. And so the people that you're living amongst, you're now considered by King Chedorlaomer and his allies, you are considered, Lot and family, as one of them, as one of the defeated foe. From what we can gather, Lot lived in the area of Sodom, and most likely he did not go out to the battle. He stayed in Sodom. He didn't go out and fight. He didn't flee into the mountains, didn't fall into any kind of tar pit. He was still there in his home. And so when the victorious army came and plundered the city and took with them food and everything, they also took hostages. They took people. Most likely their plan was to take these people back to their home area and make slaves out of all of them. And indentured servants. That most likely was their plan. And so they captured Lot. He's just another guy amidst everybody else from King Chedorlaomer's point of view. He's nothing special. He's just one family, just another group of hostages. And so they took many people and they took much stuff. This is war. This is what you're getting here is a description of what war is. But you see how God is sovereignly directing all of this, because now this war is going to have an effect upon Abram, a major effect upon Abram. And from what you can see, here's the running kind of theme that you see, because it's going to change. But as of right now, no one can defeat King Chedorlaomer. No one. No one can defeat King Chedorlaomer, can defeat any of his allies. Everyone is being defeated by him. So who is going to rise up and be the hero? Who is going to rise up and defeat King Chedorlaomer and his men? Who's God going to raise up? Who's God going to bring to the surface, to bring to the situation of who is going to be the one that will take care of King Chedorlaomer and defeat him? It's going to be who? It's going to be Abram. It's going to be Abram. And in verse 13 to verse 16, which we'll look at next time, when we get to verse 13 to 16, what you're going to see is Abram respond to the situation at hand, and he's going to show more demonstrations of faith in God. You're going to see the faith of Abram once again manifest itself in the response Abram has to the battle that took place and the reality that his son, or his nephew Lot, who's like a son to him, his nephew Lot and Lot's family, you're going to see that love that he has for his nephew, how that relationship forces Abram, will bring to the surface more demonstrations of faith in God on the part of Abraham, or Abram. And so next time, that's where we'll go. Verse 13 to verse 16. Let's pray. Dear God, we do thank you again for this time to look at your word, to look at the story here of this battle, this war. War is never good. It shows us that war happens because of the sin that exists in this world. But Lord, you are over, you still are sovereign in this world. You still are moving these events to take place just as it has been recorded for the purpose of raising up Abram. And you're going to shine forth through Abram. And what you're doing in this chapter is glorious. It's mind-boggling. And Lord, thank you for the opportunity to be able to study this chapter, to be able to work through it, and be able to learn from it. We give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. And so we're going to next time, as I said, we'll look at verse 13 to 16. That will end this half chapter, or first section in this chapter. And then verse 17 to verse 24, that is a different section that we will look at that relates to what the results of what happens in this battle and what Abram does next in verse 13 to 16. So it all connects together. So next time we'll continue looking at this story and this situation and what we can learn from it. So take care. May the Lord continue to bless you. Tell others about the series. Tell others about the study in Genesis. But may God richly bless you, and we'll see you next time.